Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Vancouver Life Real Estate Podcast and YouTube channel. We are very excited today to have Mr. Vince Taylor back with us, a fan favorite and knowledge powerhouse in the space. Vince is the founder and owner of Pilot House, a project marketing firm focusing on pre-built sales and marketing. They have sold over 17,000 units, and this has generated over $6 billion in revenue. Safe to say, Vince has been around the block a couple times, and I think he is the absolute perfect guest for us here today, as it kind of feels like the sky is falling, but you know what? It's fallen before, and guess what? We're still alive. So Vince brings with him a wealth of knowledge and experience in real estate, and we're super happy to have him here. Vince, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, my pleasure, and thank you for having me back. And the sky is definitely not falling, so let's start there, and we can jump in wherever you guys want. This will be a complicated and contradictory hour, I think. So we'll have to kind of go over a few points. And if there's something, if I'm not being clear, please jump back in, because I think it's imperative to people listening that they understand this is not a simple situation where it's either up or down. There's a lot going on here. So it should be a lot of fun to get into it.
Great. Okay. Well, typical person, maybe they've only been in real estate or focusing on it for, let's say, under 5, 6, 7 years. As we know, last year, 2021, more people bought homes than ever in history for a single year. And all of a sudden, rates are quadruple what they were before. And, the news came out today and said, look, 1 in 4 homeowners will have to sell if rates go up again. That's the news. They all love to get those headlines out there to terrify people. But let's look at reality a bit here. So, stock market tanking, real estate, everyone's saying it's tanking, rates going up forever, inflation, 40-year highs. Is the sky not falling? Let's hear some sort of contradictory opinions here.
Okay. So, this is, again, a complicated thing. So we're going to go through it a few times. The first thing that doesn't get spoken of as much as I think needs to be addressed is the reality of interest rates. So let's take a step away from the real estate market, because we get focused thinking that we are the most important thing in the whole world and interest rates should be catering to us. Well, that in fact isn't true. Yeah, and at the risk of offending the economists for oversimplifying a complicated situation, here it goes. A country, a municipality, a province needs nominal interest rates of approximately 5% to operate. You can't operate a pension fund. You can't operate the teacher's fund. You can't have the Chicago Fireman's Fund. You can't have a municipal bond. You can't run a country under nominal interest rates less than 5%. So for those of us who are older and our whole lives have been 5 to 15%, that's the reality. The simplistic version is this. Inflation typically runs around 2%. So if I'm a pension fund manager and I'm doing old age pension, CPP, and millions of people are relying on fixed income, those pension fund managers are restricted to investing in funds that are ultra safe. Good news, bad news. We can't lose the old people's money, but ultra safe investments last year, when real estate was so high, were paying 0.8%. Or nothing. So let's call it 0.8. Let's call it 1% for crazy good investment. So if inflation's running at 2%, and I'm getting of that age where fixed income I'm starting to understand better, and my interest rate is 1% and inflation's running at 2%, we've got a problem. We have what's called an unfunded liability. Mm-hmm. So the Canadian pension situation is serious. The European central banks are in terrible trouble. Japan has had 0 negative interest rates for 20 years. Our economy is in shambles. So when we step back from the selfish nature of the real estate investor, and I'm going to come back to why it's actually a good thing, understanding what nominal interest rates mean and how they affect the worldwide economy. And I think when we were talking last, we talked about macro to micro. Okay. If you don't understand Shanghai, you can't understand Coquitlam.
That's exactly right.
So if you don't understand what interest rates mean to the world and the world of economics and the stock market, then looking at it in a kind of a bubble, in a vacuum, can get very confusing. And that's what's causing a lot of trouble in the media, is we're talking about interest rates going up as if it's a bad thing. If your grandmother's on a fixed income, she's been really suffering. This is a really good thing.
I mean, if she's got, call it $100,000 in the bank, and the nominal interest rate is 1.25%,
yes,
and you've got inflation at 6.8%.
Correct.
is she not losing money?
She's getting slaughtered, and we don't want to see grandma get slaughtered because I'm damn near grandpa. So, I mean, this is selfish. I got a leg in both camps here. So let's say inflation comes under control, which we will need to talk about today and why this is happening. We need nominal interest rates higher. And so for people who have only been in the market for 4 or 5 years, as to your point in the introduction, you've never seen 10, 12, 14% interest rates. I'm here to tell you we didn't die at 18 to 20% interest rates in 1981. Now, we didn't like it, but we didn't die, and here we are. So getting back to a healthy rate where we can run the country of Canada, the city of Vancouver, or the country of Ireland, we need these interest rates. This is a good thing for people on a fixed income, and the rest of us will just have to get along with it.
Question for you then. If in the 80s we were able to survive at, call it 15 to 18% interest rate, the value of the homes at that point were not what they are today. So I think maybe one of the big fears is that, you could be looking at 5% interest on a $1.5 million mortgage as opposed to a $200,000 or $300,000 mortgage, right? And that could break the back of somebody who's already operating at their limits just to secure that mortgage. I wonder if that's the perspective that some people are taking.
It's a great perspective, and we also have to take in real wages because I was also making $3 an hour in 1981.
Fair enough.
And so, yes, you guys are realtors, you understand the old maxim that it used to take 5 years' salary to buy a car. 1 year's salary to buy a car, which is still true, and 5 years' salary to buy a house, which is no longer true. Now it's 18 to 21 in Vancouver, but it used to be. So we do have a wage gap. You also get into this much longer question about entitlement. Because you were born in Vancouver doesn't entitle you to live there. Because you were born in London doesn't mean you can live downtown London, where the wage gap is 27 to 30 years of income. Again, macro to micro. So things have changed from the village of Vancouver in 1981 to the international city that we see today. So it gets more complicated than that. So I understand the perception from people who haven't been around. The sense of entitlement is also very skewing because it isn't true. I mean, I'm just, call me the Don Cherry of real estate. It isn't true. If you want me to tell you the truth, quit whining. All right? This is what's happening. And you people who believe that you're entitled, you're going to get a hard lesson here. But again, back to point one, the sky is not falling. Let's figure out how to work within the realities and the nominal interest rates that we need, because it does have a positive effect on the market as well, which is what we got to get into.
Yeah. Okay, and just before that, I am curious, as you obviously had boots on the ground through the 80s and lived through those 18%-ish interest rates, what was the feeling on the ground? What was the outcome? Like, were you seeing foreclosures across the board? Was everybody just, dropping off their keys and walking away from their homes?
No.
And how does it feel compared to today?
Nothing even like that. I mean, yes, some of that went on, of course. But can you imagine if you were on a fixed income in those days? Those were the glorious days, the most wonderful days for a pension fund manager, for our elders, and for anyone who had money in the bank. They used to call it coupon clipping. You could put money in your savings account and watch it grow. Right? So that's never been experienced. So as bad as we felt about this sector called real estate, the truth of the matter was most people already owned a home. They were locked into the mortgage rates and were not largely affected by it. We talk about it as if everybody had to renew their mortgage. If you had to renew your mortgage in July 1981, it was a bad day. But if you had renewed it 2 years before and you're on a 10-year term, so what? Because by the time it came around again, it didn't matter. So it didn't have the day-to-day effect that you might have imagined it would. But in my day, through my career, I bought my first home in 1987. Any interest rate under 10% was considered fantastic. 8.3, 9.3, because the market was priced relative to the interest rates, which is what's going to happen again today. That's why the sky's not falling, because the fundamentals, which we have to talk about, are so good that interest rates play this big a component, and they're going to cause some problems for a small segment of people for sure. Yeah, right, for sure.
On our podcast, I mean, I think I'd say the theme we've had since these corrections or these increases in interest rates started happening was that the pain that we're going to go through is going to be relatively short-lived.
I agree.
And that being said, I'm not entirely sure what's on the other side of it. But these, when you do look back over time, when you look at the last time we went from, 4 to 14% inflation and then back down to, call it 4%, that sort of time frame was 3 to 5 years. Right. And I think a lot of people feel like when the sky's falling, they got to do something now. And I would argue that maybe not doing something now is probably the best thing.
Well, when we were talking last, I was looking at a text that I sent you in January. And predictions are, they're like magic tricks. There's no real magic, and the predictions are only based on experience. So I told you in January, market was going to peak in May. And you kind of went, I don't think I know this guy knows what he's talking about. I wasn't off by too much. And that was not because I'm so clever. It's just because the fundamental things are going to fall into place had to happen within that time frame. So we'll start off with my prediction and work backwards. Why? Again, it's not a magic trick. It's not about me. It's about looking at the signs on the road. This market will slow down for sure into the fall. It'll bubble along until Christmas, and then we're going to see prices that make what we just went through look like nothing. They're going to go crazy. So you've got let's start with a conclusion, and halfway before we can get rolling, you got a 6 months window to buy something, which is what we told everybody in January.
It's kind of what we've been telling people too. Right now, it's like, we've just gone through 2.5 years of no inventory.
That's right.
And, since December to where we are now, we've seen it double. Right. So, and sellers are in a position where they are, more or less thinking that they're forced to negotiate on this because they want to sell now.
It's about time.
Right. And so, but what nobody seems to really be talking about is that Canada has still been on pace with their 450,000 permanent residents every year, and it's increasing. And as the world, in my opinion, becomes more unstable,
we're the Mecca.
Canada becomes a more stable environment to be in.
All right. Well, let's get down to the nuts and bolts, because I know I could do this for hours, and you guys only have an hour. So, do you want to kick it off with a question, or do you just want me to ramble on here?
Okay. People like to guess or know or have forecasts into timeframes. Okay. Right now, we don't know where the bottom of this market is. Based on the fundamentals, based on your experience, based on the 5 times you've been through this already. You mentioned maybe you dropped down till about winter of this year. What kind of price reductions can you predict?
So typically in any kind of a recession, and this is an asterisk recession, it's not a real recession, land comes off about 20%, and we need to circle back to this if we have time. And your market prices come off between 10 to 15%. We've already seen some of that baked into the market. Now, what does come off mean? It means also come off from an unrealistic number. And this is where it gets complicated and contradictory. We often talk about socks at Walmart. If they were $32 and you said no, and they fell to $24, but they were never worth $32. So if somebody lists their house, which is, you see it all the time, at these prices, I'll just throw my house on the market, and if it doesn't sell, it doesn't sell. And then say, oh my God, the price came off because we got anchored to the unrealistic price. So in any kind of real or somewhat false recession, you're going to see a minimum of 10% decrease. Because we have buyer fatigue right now. The buyers have said, I don't know what to do. We need a smoke break. People don't smoke anymore. I guess that's a bad analogy. We need a smoke break.
Is that a thing?
We need a break. I got to step out and I got to gather my thoughts, because to your point, there's 450,000 people now coming. About 30% of those every year come to Vancouver. Standing inventory, you guys tell me, let's argue and say it's 10,000.
Sure.
Well, you don't have to be good at math to know that's a lot different than 400,000, even if we say 100,000. But they're coming every year with no way of increasing the supply fast enough.
That's right.
So we've got people who still haven't made it here. We've got the instability in the world. You've got the Ukrainian people coming. You've got the Syrian people coming. You've got another couple 100,000 people coming, and no way to increase the supply side. So why do we have inflation? You didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you.
Please.
The inflation, again, is generally false, because it's what they used to call stagflation. Now, you don't want to get into economics so far today, but it's important to understand. So when real wages grow very, very quickly, people who sell things put the price up. We'll call that inflation. until such a point where it's no. But if there's supply chain issues and other issues that are outside of the typical economics, they call that stagflation. Wages are not going up, but your washing machine just went up 30%.
Or your food costs.
Or your food costs. The washing machine, we're not short of washing machines. They're stuck in a container in Shanghai. I was talking to a car dealer yesterday, and they sold 2,000 cars last year. This year they sold 1,000 because you can't get the chip from Taiwan, which shut down the BMW factory, which meant when they finally produced the cars, they couldn't get them out of Shanghai. There aren't any cars. So the price of cars went up, not because we're short of cars, because we can't get them here.
So we have a problem with the business cycle.
We have an interrupted business cycle caused by COVID, and it's not Mr. Putin's fault, and it's not this other fault. It's a supply chain issue. So this transitory inflation is actually correct, in my view. It is a transitory thing. We're not going to sit at 8% because wages haven't gone crazy. We're at full employment, which is not recessionary. We're at historically low interest rates, which is not recessionary. A huge influx of Canadians, people coming to Canada, creating new jobs because we got to build new houses. That's not inflationary. So what are we talking about? What's the reason? Well, the reason is the supply chain issues from COVID. So
could I add one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think there's another element.
Yeah.
I think because of COVID and because of the shutdown of COVID, the government also printed 35% more money in 2 years and pumped it into the system. Lo and behold, and with good intention to keep people afloat, to grant businesses tax breaks, everybody try and get through the period. And now we're going through quantitative tightening. And everyone's got their hands up, like, you're taking my money away. And it was like, well, it was never like this.
It was never your money, dude. Like, what are you doing to me? So you're 100% right. And, you know, we can go down a number of these roads. So thank you for that. So those are the key items. But getting into the elasticity of money and M1 money supply is a bigger, longer drama. But you got it right. Nobody actually prints money. There is no printing press. But the net result is what you said. We become a wash in cash that we need to take back. Candy from the baby, and the baby's not happy. Okay? So what's going on here? So if you're the central bank, this is the most beautiful excuse to raise interest rates because you can't run your country. They're wringing their hands saying, thank God, now we can raise interest rates so our pension funds operate. We can get back to nominal rates, and we'll blame the war in Ukraine, we'll blame Putin because he's easy, we'll blame China because everybody's blaming China for everything, and we'll blame COVID and we'll blame this. All of those are partly true, but we can't run a country without it. Back to point one. Okay? So we come back again to the supply and demand issues. And here's where it gets also complicated. If you get a situation where 100,000 people are taken out of the market, let's say, for easy math, because the interest rates went up 1 point. They were already so thin, but they could make it. Now they can't. Okay, great. Well, guess how many are going to be out when we raise it 2 more points? And guess what happens to those people? They have to rent. Okay? What's happening to the rental market in Vancouver? Everyone will tell you. Skyrocket. But we're going to add 200,000 more renters to the rental market. So what happens to rent? An 8-year-old will tell you the rents are going to go up. So what do the investors of real estate do when rents go up? They buy real estate.
Why wouldn't?
So what does that do to the price of real estate? It drives it back up again, right? They don't really give a damn one way or the other if the rates are 3% or 4% because we just build it into the rent. Because the math is easy. We're talking $28 per 100,000 on an interest rate. Who gives a shit? Pardon me. If you're paying $2,800 for rent and it goes to 32, the real estate investors they're loving this. So you get a contradiction. Well, the market's falling, but the market's not falling because the investors are going to go buy specific investor design product, which drives the price of real estate back up again, which makes it harder for people to get in because not only they couldn't afford the interest rate, but now they can't afford the price. And off we go again because there's no supply. Right? So now you've got this double contradiction of the market falling. The other thing that happens is the price of land. Now, I realize to most listeners the price of land is less important. But let's say you two guys, because you're successful realtors now, and you buy this piece of land down the road and you're going to build a 4-plex, right? Or a 6-plex. Well, the guy that owns it right now has had a hard time financing land because there's no revenue, because it's raw land. Hardest thing to finance. Okay, so now it's you two guys saying this was a great idea and you're blaming each other, right? Well, you wanted to buy that stupid piece of land. All of a sudden you go to the bank and they're like, dude, your interest reserves have all gone out of whack. Now, interest reserve is another whole topic, but they need you to not just have the money to buy the land, but the interest reserves to cover the development cost to build the sixplex, right? Mm-hmm. So you know the revenue is good, you know this, but you can't get there from here because Brenda didn't lend you enough money to cover the interest reserve. Now you have to sell it. So you're going to dump the land. And the land buyers are like, these two guys shouldn't have bought it, but they had a great idea. They didn't factor in interest, which I told you was going to happen in January, but you did it anyway. And now what? So there's some tremendous deals in land, but they're spot deals. All right, that's why land falls. So now if you extrapolate that into a big site in Surrey, it used to be worth 100 million. Well, it's not going to 50 million. It's going to go to 95 million. 5 million is a big deal. It sounds like a big come off, but it was never really worth 100 million in the first place. So there's some really great spot deals on land because of the difficulties to finance the land. And then what happens? The real estate developers come in and they buy it, which drives the price back up again. So the contradiction is the price of land is falling until people buy it, which drives it back up again because the supply is a disaster. You guys don't have enough supply to sell into your hungry crowd right now.
No chance.
So you need that guy to buy that land sixplex, whether you own it or sell it, and so that you can get, because you're telling him, if you could build these things quickly, we could sell them at a fair price. Even if the interest rates are 5%, you got people knocking on your door. 2 kids in tow, they can't afford the rent. We might as well buy at these prices. But you can't because, right? So the very forces that are bringing the market down are the exact forces that are going to bring it back up.
It's interesting because when I talk to buyers, and they say to me, well, I think I'm going to keep waiting until the price really bottoms out. And I'm going to go, well...
That's in about half an hour.
Well, then I keep telling them that it's probably sooner than you think.
Yes.
But at the same time, as you continue to wait, your money gets more and more expensive. Yeah. So do you act now or do you act later? And because my fear is that if you wait to act, your opportunity, because we've seen these things correct, and when they correct quick.
So fast.
In the same way it came off the top. Yep. Right? Because we're a highly leveraged city.
Yes, 100%.
When we're highly leveraged, these interest rate tweaks, it has more of an effect on psychology and behavior.
Correct. Than it does
on the actual marketplace, right? 100%. And so people step right off and they go, well, I'm just going to wait. It's finally crashing. Yeah.
And they're out there renting. And I'll share a quick rental story because we just experienced it about a month ago. 2-bedroom condo that we had sold, and the new buyers were moving into it. So the tenants had to move out, and they shared their story that in Coquitlam, 3 days on market, the rental received 100 applications for rent. If you think it's hard to buy real estate right now and you worry about multiples going up against 2 or 3 offers, imagine going up against 99 other applications. Incredible.
I'm hearing it all the time.
Choose your pain, because it sounds like it's on either side.
And I don't want to complicate it any further, but we've had many podcasts where we see the government try to change a policy or change the way you buy something to try and correct the issue. All of this is
nonsense.
Junk.
It's nonsense.
It doesn't lead to anything except the consumer is under the false pretense that something is going to happen. And then they arguably miss their opportunity because they've been told the wrong thing from an authoritative body.
That's exactly right, and thank you for putting it so articulately. And that's the frustration that we have out there, is that this stuff sounds good on a coffee mug or a T-shirt. Ban foreign ownership for 2 years.
Well, look at CMHC, what they did 2 years ago.
Yeah, and until I got so mad and went on the air and said, stop these guys, or I'm pulling my advertising off these various stations. It's we understand that the media folks have a job to do. And you have to have news. I mean, the first 3 letters is new. So you have to say something new if you want news every single day. And there isn't anything new. So the fundamentals, as you suggest, I'm going to pick up on your point. So if interest rates are going up, and they are, which we all knew, and that kind of flurry of buying is over that we talked about in April and May, those people that were on the fence, If you wait longer and they're going up further, not only are you going to see price increases, but you're going to see interest rate increases.
Yes, you're paying double.
You're paying double. Your pain is going to double. So if you don't buy something in the next 6 months, you've missed a double pain window.
Right.
So the exact contrary of the sky is falling.
That was a great pun, by the way.
You like that? PYA.
Double pain window.
Double pain window. So if you don't buy in this window, you're in for a world of pain even more. And yet the media will tell you, to your exact point, that the market's falling, the sky's falling. But it fundamentally can't, because we're not in a real recession. Let's go back to it again. Nominal interest rates had to go up. There is no inventory. Government policies are childish. And I would love to have Mr. Trudeau sitting here. I'm not a political guy. I don't care which guy is in place. When you start banning one group of owners over another, it's just childish. Never works, can't work, prohibition can't work, blah, blah, blah.
It feeds into that entitlement.
It is just let the market do its job. But there's the naysayers who are telling their friends, no, we're going to wait. 420,000 people are coming to Canada every year for the next 10 years, and there are no homes. An 8-year-old will tell you,
where are they going to go?
Where are we going to go? And a better question is, why are we inviting them? Well, we're inviting them partly because we don't have enough growth.
Yeah.
Almost 75% of all new jobs are created by immigrants. Well, what are we going to do if they don't come? We're dead. If they do come, we're dead. So what would you like us to do? So they're raising interest rates under all these false flags. But I can tell you that the price will adjust slightly, and the people that couldn't afford to get into the market at these ridiculous 2% interest rates, sorry, put your big boy pants on. That's the way it goes. Interest rates are going to be 5 to 7% if you want to get a decent mortgage, and that's it. And the market will adjust, and your job will adjust, and everything will be fine. But the fundamentals right now are in place for a roaring rental market and a roaring real estate market that'll start again in January.
Got it. So talking a bit more about the government and rising rates.
Yes.
Governments have debts as well.
Yes.
At what point, at what interest rate can the government almost collapse under its own debt payments? Is that a thing?
It happened under the first Mr. Trudeau. Canada was, if you can imagine, debt-free.
I can't.
Debt-free.
Since I've been alive, Canada's been in debt.
Right. And so again, I don't have a political bone in my body. It could have been Mr. Anybody. Whoever was in power at that time decided, and if you follow my other stuff, we are the government, so I have myself to blame. We can't. They're supposed to enact policies that we tell them to, not the other way around. So we're at fault here.
I think we've also kind of lost our way a bit with that.
I think so, but that's a podcast for another day. So you're 100% right. The Bank of the country of Canada, as the U.S. and all these others, are absolutely insolvent. And that is a brain-damaging understanding, because the ability to print money, the elasticity of money, for a country that has a large GDP is terribly confusing. You can't run your house with this level of debt. There's trillions of dollars in debt in the U.S., and Canada is not far behind, especially this last year. We've more than doubled the Canadian debt in the last 3 years.
Wow.
3 years, we've doubled it. And when I was born, we didn't have any. So because Canada is both a borrower of money and a lender of money, when we lend money and interest rates go up, let's say we lend it, we're not going to pick on Brazil, but let's pick on Brazil because we've heard of it. We lend them a few $billion at 2%. Well, now the interest rates go to 4%. Brazil says, sorry, can't pay. So they default on their debt. But people who buy Canada savings bonds are buying Canada debt, and when those interest rates go up, they want us to pay them higher interest rate, which we can't pay.
Correct.
So we're being a borrower and a lender, we're collapsing under our own debt in two ways, because we can't afford our own interest payments, and the people that we lent it to can't afford to pay us back.
That's scary.
It's terrifying. Wherever Scary left the building. This is so much brain damage, and it would be fun one day, even though it's not real estate related, to get an economist in here who can really explain it. I'm giving you the wave tops because I've had the benefit of speaking with people who are very bright in this field, and I'm not one of those. But I grasp the big picture, and you've nailed it. So we just do this. We just pretend none of this is true, and we carry on as if real estate and interest rates are the only thing that matters in our world, but they really aren't. There's a lot more at stake here.
What's the potential outcomes here? Does that mean they're just going to cap out pretty quick here and start to stimulate and go down in rates? Or is there actually a chance of defaults?
The defaults are very real, very real. The U.S. has never defaulted. One of the few countries, Canada, has not yet defaulted. Many countries have defaulted on their debt. Happens all the time. And then your currency gets devalued and you get into a whole thing. So the chances, my one opinion, my amateur opinion on economics is that we are not going to default. We will continue to falsely print money to pretend that none of this is really happening. Because that's a conversation that's so entangled into, what is the debt load per household? What is the debt load for a country? What percentage of GDP can you carry? And this is a great long discussion. So let's say in the foreseeable future, we'll call that 20 years, Canada is not going to default on their debt regardless of the interest rates. That doesn't mean that we aren't spending huge amounts of our tax dollars just to pay our interest, which has gone up and causes inflation and around, right? But today we'll focus on what it means to real estate. And the prices of real estate adjust. And for the stock market listeners, it's like when a stock splits and you think, well, this should make the price go crazy, because it's split down, but it somehow rises back up to where it was. And you think, well, how could it be? It was $10, now it's $5. If it's really only worth $5, how could it be trading at 10? But in almost all cases, stock splits end up reverting back where they were. Well, economically, that makes no sense.
Well, Warren Buffett will also say that the average stock will fluctuate roughly between 50 and 80% of its intrinsic value over 1 year, but the business itself doesn't fluctuate between 80 to 50,
Absolutely
50 to
does
80%.
Not. You're filling bottles full of Coca-Cola. You just go to your plant every day. You didn't do anything different. You sold the same amount. Yeah. So why would the stock price fluctuate? Yeah. Right. Psychology, back to it. So when we go back to the fundamentals of the real estate, and this is so fun to get off, but I'll try to stay on topic here. You've got historically low interest rates, and I think it's critical for younger people listening who only knew 2%. Anything under 5 to 10% is fantastic, okay? Yeah, if you get over 10%, we're going to get into a different podcast. So let's say these are among the lowest interest rates I've ever seen in my 60 years on Earth, okay? So this is still pretty low. And you've got huge immigration, and you've got full employment, and you've got a false inflation caused by the money supply and a pandemic, which none of us knew the outcome. That has created a buying window right now because the buyers were fatigued, and you guys deal with it every day. You can't have a real estate market where every time somebody walks in, the price has gone up. As buyers and sellers, as the three of us are, you throw your hands up. You throw your hands up. So I am quietly relieved that we are finally stopping the madness of price increases, because it also has caused construction prices to stabilize.
We're of the same boat in that, it's funny because when we read sort of the comments, for example, on our podcasts and on our YouTube channels, people often say, oh, you guys are talking like these price corrections are a bad thing. And okay, well, we are taking it from the perspective of somebody who has maybe just bought a home or someone who's recently in a home. You rarely want to see your wealth erode, right? So it's from that perspective. But from the perspective of buying, well, it's time to get on the horse.
Absolutely.
Right? And I generally think from here, I just look historically. In 2008 was a good example too, where, everyone took their hands off, right? And then it was about 12 months later, we were at all-time new highs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, we talked about...
that was a worse, maybe potentially.
That was a real recession. That was exactly caused by something else. I mean, that was something different. We talked about this a little bit, and it's, kind of half tongue-in-cheek as buyers and sellers, but I think it's a point worth repeating. Canadians are extraordinarily hypocritical about the price of real estate. At all the cocktail parties, we say, oh yeah, those poor kids are never going to the market. Hell with the kids. There's one day, and you guys, we talked about, there's one day that the three of us hoped the real estate price would be low, and that's the day we bought something. And every single day after that, we dream of the day it's going to go higher and higher because we have no pension. We're not going to get a gold watch from the factory. The three of us in this room.
Yeah.
Without our real estate, we're dead.
Well, our good friend and colleague Steve Soretsky has been quoted as saying, everybody wants affordable housing until it's your house.
That's exactly right. And it's the henny penny thing. And so people who follow, the kind of stuff that I talk about, it's extraordinarily hypocritical. It isn't true. We don't want prices to fall. We want Vancouver to be the highest price in the whole world so the three of us can retire,
That's right.
leverage our real estate, and to hell with the kids. Right? If we're going to be honest, to hell with the kids. We're in, they're out, too bad. Mm-hmm. And that's where it is. I mean, you think you're going to buy a house in London? I mean, no. So we got to get over that. And we talked a little bit about, the kind of work that we do at Pilot House. We have to think about designing homes that are different for people who are going to live in them forever. A single family house is no longer on the table for millions of people in major cities. We can't look at it and say you failed because you don't live in a beautiful home we're in today.
Which is what
it can't be a failure.
I think a lot of consumers see their life that way. It's like if you hear, oh well, the dream of the single family home is gone for me. Mm-hmm. And okay, well then what is your dream then? Right? That's because right. It's also gone for a lot of people. Millions and millions and millions. You go to big cities in Asia. There's no single family home. There's also just no space. Well, there's no space because our density is going to increase. And we have to do, as a development community, a much better job of making people understand and feel better about it, but also provide cradle-to-grave housing. Literally, you buy a studio when you're 20, you get yourself a shiny girlfriend, you get a one and den, you get 2 kids, you move to the upper floor, have a 2-bedroom, she kicks your ass out, keeps the 2-bedroom, you move down to the 1-bedroom so you can see your kids on weekend. She dies or you die, you're back in the thing we bury out in the back. There has to be a cycle within that building where I never leave. That means the Amazon guy can find me. That means I've got a concierge. That means groceries can be delivered. That means I have private place for recreating and all these things which we never used to consider because we considered condos and apartments, if you're in the US, a transitory step. That's not the fact anymore. This is an international city where you're going to live in a vertical community for the rest of your life. That's an interesting perspective to take because I guarantee you the vast majority of people buying real estate are doing it as a stepping stone to that home. Right. And to tell them that, hey, look, the chances of you getting beyond here, well, at least in this city, are slim to none. Moving on up means the 22nd floor. Yeah. It doesn't mean the single family house. If you go to Shanghai, one of my favorite cities, you go to the French concession, there's a handful of houses downtown. And you think, what the heck? How? I mean, the price is just outrageous because there's 20 houses in the whole city. Right. Yeah. Everybody else is living in an apartment. Anyway, we're off topic a little bit. But as you go macro to micro, and you understand historical interest rates, I'm beating this point up, you understand limited supply, which we still have not even come close to correcting. We understand the real nature of the inflation. We understand interest rates, and we understand that there's so much pressure on housing right now that there's only one place that prices and rents are going to go, which is going to drive the investment market. So if you're a real estate investor now, you guys might make those 6plexes that you're going to build, you might make them a little smaller, right? Because you say, geez, if we make them 3,000 square feet, the rent would be outrageous. Let's make them 2,000 square feet. Well, and rents are tied to income. So if income doesn't go up, then you can't get more rent. So then why would I build something that I can't rent? And even though it gets disconnected from reality a little bit, with 420,000 people coming in, some people will be able to afford it. That's it. So your point is half true. If we build too expensive, but we've already lost connection to reality a long time ago. The average person, household making $82,000, the average Canadian wage is $67,000. Which means you're not living in Vancouver. Goodbye, going to Prince George. Okay, so do you really care then if the rent is $2,800 or $3,500? Because you're not going to rent to that guy anyway. You're renting to the new Canadian who's coming with money, who is being attempted to be restricted by our federal government, who's supposed to take orders from us. Why would we ever restrict foreign ownership and immigration? Because they're the only ones who are going to pay you, whoever they are, from whatever country. They're the ones with the money. And everybody else moves to the small towns because that's how it works in the big world. It just, if you grew up in Port Moody, you didn't understand that. And they didn't teach us that in school, but that's a different thing. So the macroeconomics, I go back to it and back to it and back to it because we're not hearing enough of it in the mainstream media. This is our new reality. This 6-month window is fantastic. So my clients who are trying to bring multifamily on, some with understandable fear. Oh my God, I'm getting phone calls. What if the market's going down? And, if you guys are listening, we're okay. This is actually the opposite of bad because
we're going to see a huge influx of people needing to get in before the next big interest rate, which we're happy is coming if you're trying to buy, because you're going to get in underneath it, right? So get into the market right now, because that slowdown, as we mentioned, is going to go through the summer, because summer's typically, people are at the park. September, October, we're going to be muddling around, and then goodbye. After Christmas, if you miss this window, they're going to be phoning you and complaining like, you should have told me. We just told you.
I always will often reference the GVRD price chart that dates back to 1977.
Right.
And from that era all the way up to today, the biggest sort of lull in between a price peak to where it bottomed and then came back to equal that same amount was about 8 years.
Yeah.
And that happened in the 80s.
Right.
So as long as you didn't sell, if you bought at the absolute peak then, if you didn't sell for 8 years, you would have sold for the same amount.
Correct.
And that was detached. Townhomes and condos recovered much quicker. Since then, the longest recovery is something like 18 months.
Correct.
So if you're afraid that you're buying today at a peak, so what? Hold it for that 7 years like we always tell you. I mean, I don't know anyone today who doesn't look back at the 2008 peak and go, I would have killed to have bought at that peak.
Yeah.
Now, that's a very interesting comment, because where my mind goes to is that acceleration in time frame.
Mm-hmm.
So from an 8-year recovery to an 18-month recovery.
Right.
I think is a function of two things. One would be immigration.
Yep.
And two would be fiscal money supply.
Mm-hmm. You love that topic. We're going to have to do a whole topic on that.
Well, because I think nobody talks about it.
You're 100% right. It's because it's complicated and it's hard to get your mind around that.
Well, when one person owns the balance sheet,
Yeah.
then it becomes very difficult to understand.
Yeah. And you're right. And so before Expo and before a lot of people were born, it was the village of Vancouver. And if you go to a small town, and there's small town listeners here, you don't get much fluctuation in many small towns. Now, I used to always pick on Merritt. You bought it for $100,000, 10 years later, it's worth $100,000. You got a 10 cap from rent, but no capital appreciation.
It's just a cash flow.
Yeah, and now Merritt has changed again. Janice, if you're listening, sorry about picking on Merritt. So pick a new small town where you don't get in-migration. The province of Saskatchewan had 1 million people, and not one more or less, for 50 years.
Wow.
Zero population fluctuation. Zero. Nothing. As soon as someone died, they forced someone to be born. Like it was that quick. They had this method. I don't know how they did it. So, and now the population has jumped significantly, and farmland is going up, and all these things are going up. So you take these case by case. Well, look at the population of the city of Vancouver and the country of Canada and these places, to your exact point. It's gone to 18 months because external pressures have changed everything. And with an unstable world that you mentioned in the first opening minutes, where else are you going to go? Back to the story I told you, my friend on Canby Street saying, hey, it's been right underneath your nose, right? You remember that story?
You didn't buy now, you didn't buy now, you didn't buy now.
And then you're blaming us.
Now you're blaming me.
Yeah. Well, whoever those star-bellied sneeches are, those bad people, whoever they are, well, it's right under our noses again, because if you want to live in a stable region of the world, where are you going to go? The country, the options are getting smaller and smaller.
They are.
Clean air, clean water, great government, stable money, great schools for your kids. Food supply. The list starts to get really short, really fast, right? Mm-hmm. So on top of regular immigration, you're going to have super visas, you're going to have all kinds of other stuff. And you're going to have people starting businesses here. And I would like to see us do a better job on that. But again, that's politics for another day. So just the fundamentals of real estate are so strong in the city of Vancouver that to suggest this is some kind of doom and gloom is insane. Now, the homes are still on average appreciating at about 8% a year. So using the rule of 70, your home doubles every 10 years. Okay. Someone who's asked me, what do you need to retire? Because this is a big, the gray wave going to Qualicum Beach. I bought my first house in 1987 for roughly $65,000, which seems crazy. I know I'm old, but I'm not that old, for God's sake. Today it's worth, call it $1 million. It's gone at about 8% every year, so it doubles every 10 years. The average person needs about $6,000 to $7,000 a month in retirement. You're going to be retired for 20 years-ish, 65 to 85, call it, all bets off. That's $1 million. Mm-hmm. So you need $1 million worth of assets or real estate to be able to comfortably retire. That house would have provided that for me with no pension. Do I want the price of real estate to go down?
No.
Do I want any policies that would create it to go down? Do I want to afford it? Absolutely not.
Would you elect somebody who said they're going to make housing prices go down?
Never.
Well, think about the responsibility that falls to the government to supply that. Now all of a sudden it's their responsibility, or that seems to be the way of the thought process, right? I guess the other thing that I've got an interesting sort of thought going around in my mind is, okay, we talked 8 years recovery, then we talked 18 months recovery, and in that time frame, even that time frame is getting shorter and shorter. So are these corrections, changes in the marketplace, becoming more volatile more often because our external pressures are becoming greater and greater?
I'm going to suggest they become less volatile. To your earlier point, I think we're in a roundabout way agreeing with each other, because if it's only 18 months, there isn't time for much volatility. It's going to come off 10%. You're going to get a spot buy of 30% on land, or a spot buy if somebody gets moved to Toronto, they got to sell tonight.
Right.
So those periods of volatility are becoming lower in height and depth. So this window is consequently very short. And because it's not a real recession, volatility here will be tiny.
Right.
And the price was never worth the 10% that it's fallen. How many of your clients said, you said, well, it's worth $1.2 million, and they said, well, if you want my business listed at $1.4 million, I'm going to go to the other realtor.
We tell them to go to the other realtor.
Well, sometimes you do, but we all got to eat, right? So you end up saying it's your buddy, and you're like, dude, it's not worth $1 million for it. Oh, my wife said, and my friend, and he's a guy who works at Costco, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You've heard all these conversations. You say, piss, okay, fine, I'll do it at $1.4 million. Oh, wow, it's worth $1.2 million. Shock face, right where you said, because that's what you do for a living.
Yeah.
But they'll call that a correction.
Yeah.
There was no correction.
Yeah, it was never there.
It was never there. Now, one comment I want to make sure I get on the record, because I feel very passionate about this. I'm a big believer in non-market housing. Totally a big believer in this. So will I come across as this big bad guy, trying to drive up the price and ruin it for all the children? Hear this part of it. If I have any political bones in my body, I think that we need to look after the most vulnerable people in our society. We're going to pay anyway.
Yeah.
You are paying the cost of a hospital visit. You're paying to pick people up the street. You're paying for the homelessness. We need communities, huge communities, of areas that will never go onto the market, where we can have people live in dignity. I was talking about this with somebody else the other day. 89% of the landmass of Canada is held by the Crown, which, guess what? We're the Crown, the three of us. 11% of Canadian land is privately owned. So we have lots of land. Even if you say half of it's frozen, we got hundreds and thousands of kilometers of land doing nothing. We have the 10th largest GDP, and we don't have enough housing. Again, let's ask the 8-year-olds, what would you do if you had all this land and all this money? Well, they'd say, well, build more houses and then go back to coloring. Like they'd say, you're stupid. So
some of our podcasts sound like that.
It is so crazy. So why aren't we building 10, 15, 20,000 units in places? They don't have to be in the North Pole. Sorry for the people of Aldergrove, but you drive around out there. If you took 30 acres.
Yeah.
And just said, we're going to build a brand new school, brand new swimming pool, fabulous arts community center, high-rise, low-rise stuff. And if you're new to Canada, we're going to make this, you can stay here for 2 years or 3 years, right, and then you got to go. But we're going to make this half price, because we really want you to feel great when you're just getting your legs underneath you, a brand new school for your kids, not live in some crap that you can barely live in. And then you think, why did I move to Canada? Let's have housing that, and if you're going to have people who are compromised and need our care, what's the point? I don't want to go too far down this. A safe injection site 7 blocks away from a place in a crappy SRO where that person is vulnerable. If you're going to do this, then have facilities where they're all together. You can do this, get a great meal at the cafeteria, be checked out by your doctor, and put it all together. Because we are going to pay for those folks anyway.
The same way you master plan a community for people who are going to.
Exactly. So we need master plan for people coming to Canada, for people down on their luck. And it doesn't need to be in some remote community. Ship them off to an island. No. We have land, we have money, and we have vulnerable people that need to be clothed and housed. And I will say it's cheaper to do it this way than it is the way we're piecemealing it together. There aren't enough places for these people. And I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I don't want my comments to be misconstrued. We should build tens of thousands of housing units for different levels of people who need our help.
Yeah.
That's my feeling.
That's great. It sounds completely doable,
Very
especially framed up that way. So sort of as we start to wrap up here, Vince, I think people would love to hear, again, from your expertise, maybe a little bit more micro vision of where the true opportunities are over the next 12 to 18 months.
Right. Again, it's a longer question depending where you are in your career. But let's say we're fairly new to real estate. I still go back, and please, this is never self-serving. I still go back to pre-sale. Pre-sale, you have to have some of this in your portfolio. And for those that don't understand it, I'll be super quick. Pre-sale is one way in, 3 ways out, right? Mm-hmm. Resale is 1 way in, 2 ways out. Okay, so you should always have some in your pocket. You can buy a pre-sale, leverage your money, and assign the contract. It's still legal before you ever get out. You can close on it, you can sell it later, or you can keep it for long term. That opportunity is as important as taking advantage of the principal homeowners and tax-free thing that we talked about last time. Mm-hmm. It's also been missed. If you're a young person, you've got to find a place to live that's your principal residence, and ideally one you can fix up. There's only one opportunity in Canada for tax-free money. That's on your principal residence. Yeah. You got to move 4 times before you're married and mortgaged like you guys, right? And kids running around because then you can't because preschool and the thing, and it's hard.
It's how we ended up getting to the properties we're in too.
That's exactly right. And I know we talked about it, but I'm so passionate about it. If you're new to Canada, a fellow called me, heard one of these podcasts, came from Mexico, phoned me up because please phone me. I said, just because you're 30 with kids, you still got to buy something. Fix it up on weekends, go there on Saturday morning and paint a little bit. But so you need a principal residence tax exemption. You need to look for a fixer-upper, and then you want to have some pre-sale in your arsenal, and you have to look out to the valley. Again, the average Canadian household is $82,000. You can't
I think there's a fourth to that.
Okay, jump in.
It's grit.
Well, great. Okay, yeah. Now you're gonna get me all.
I just had to.
I'm trying to not get so stirred up. Yeah, get the body to work. That's what I was gonna say. That's what I tell my kids. But you got to go where people can live. So if you make $82,000 and interest rates have gone up, making it impossible. Now you can, you guys do the mortgages every day. What do you qualify for? $350?
Not much.
What are you going to buy? You can't buy a pair of socks. You can't buy a car. So where are you going to live? You have to live further and further and further away. Well, hello. That's what happens all over the world. Mm-hmm. You'd love to live in Toronto, but you live in Hamilton. Sorry. Mm-hmm. You'd love to live in Vancouver, but you live in Chilliwack. Sorry. Yeah. That's the way it goes. So if you're an investor or chasing affordable real estate so you can get started on all these paths, you got to go to fabulous communities. And I always talk about Mission, Abbotsford, and these places out there. Chilliwack is really evolving. These are beautiful communities with fabulous infrastructure. And yet I hear from people saying, I've never been out there. How can you not go out there? Mm-hmm. New schools, new baseball fields, new everything. A short drive up there to the Coquihalla.
Same with the island.
The island is going crazy.
Nanaimo's
Look at the price. Look at Nanaimo. For a million years, we couldn't sell things in Nanaimo. Gone crazy. Because Victoria is now unaffordable. Yeah. Right? So where are you going to go? You go to Langford. Well, Langford is the greatest place you can live, except it's getting expensive. Now we're getting high-rise towers all over Langford because people want to live there because they can get to Victoria. Mm-hmm. So it's like Central Surrey. In the old days, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, Central Surrey, King George and 108th may not have been your first choice. Now it's $1,000 a foot, $1,100, $1,200 if you're listening, $1,200 a foot. This is a fabulous, vibrant city. Mm-hmm. That's what's happened to Langford. Now Nanaimo's going to get its chance. Mm-hmm. Chilliwack was a long way out. Guess what? Chilliwack's going to explode. Yeah. So you got it from a micro perspective. Get out to the valley. Look for homes that other people don't like. I pick on the girls all the time, and again, I don't mean it to be that way, but if you take your shiny new girlfriend out, you say, hey, we're going to live in this house, and the door's falling off, and you're like, oh, this is awesome. The roof's great, foundation's great, furnace is great. She says, if you think I'm living in that place. But you got to do that 2 or 3 times, and it could easily be the other way around. So yeah, save your hate mail. But you got to live in the places that you got to fix up a little bit on weekends, and take that and look for places that are affordable, because where's the population going to go? Back to my grade 3 or 8-year-olds, they're going to say, well, they're going to go move to where they can afford. Mm-hmm. Well, where's that? It's not the west side of Vancouver.
Yeah.
Like, forget that.
Yeah.
You're not living there, forget it. You're not living in Paris, you're not living in London, Shanghai, or Manhattan. You're living in Queens.
Yeah.
Okay, or Brooklyn. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So let's move to the Brooklyn of Vancouver. Let's live to the 5 boroughs. Let's be realistic and enjoy our lives in these wonderful new vibrant communities, and don't ever think that that's a step backwards. Mm-hmm. It's like single family home ownership. We have to change that stigma, right? We really do.
I think this has been incredibly eye-opening. It's nice hearing alternate opinions and of course experiential ones as well. Vince, thank you so much as always. For our listeners and viewers here who want to know more about you and Pilot House Projects, where do they go?
Go to pilothouseprojects.com, and please, if you have questions, I'm easy to find. Shoot me a note. I guarantee I'll call you back because I love this stuff and happy to help, and I'm really pleased. A lot of people do. From this podcast last week, here, got a lot of calls, and I really like talking to people about real estate. The sky is not falling, and our prediction, just to wrap this up, is you got 6 months. Don't come crying to the 3 of us 6 months from now and say we didn't tell you. I'm telling you right now, get some grit, get off your ass, get a second job, borrow some money from your aunt, your friend, get together, do what you need to do, get into the market. That message has never changed. Because 2 days to plant 2 great times to plant a tree, right? One of them was 10 years ago. And let's leave it at that.
There you go. Perfect. This is coming from someone who bought a home for $67,000. So he knows how to do it. He's seen it happen. So thanks as always for watching and listening. Comments, feedback, leave it below. And you'll also see Vince's information in the description. Thank you and have an awesome day.
All right. Thanks, guys.